You ever drive 3 hours with your chest full of somebody else's grief and think you're ready for anything, then pull up to your own front gate and find a carnival pitched on your lawn, like the world forgot which story was supposed to belong to you? And that's how this one starts. My name is Mason Hale. I grew up where the phone barely worked and the neighbors kept their business to themselves, and the last thing I expected after my dad's funeral was a white tent with a microphone and a little plaster courthouse on our front yard, people milling around like vultures with clipboards. The first 3 breaths of that seen the smell of diesel, the bright tent canvas, the sight of a banner that read, "Public Estate Auction," felt like a punch I didn't see coming. I could see Elaine Mercer right away, slick hair, pearl studs, that sort of practiced smile people use when they're about to eat your lunch and call it a banquet. She was the HOA president, painfully official, the kind of woman who treated rules like a hobby and people like chess pieces. Behind her were a handful of men with clipboards who looked more comfortable corralling farms than tending them, and a sheriff's cruiser stood off to the side with a guy in a hat who kept looking like he wanted to be somewhere else. The auctioneer was warming up his cadence, the crowd's murmurs were getting louder, and my hands still smelling faintly of my father's coat started to shake. You don't argue about a family place when your head is full of funeral hymns, so I walked slow. I wanted to buy time to figure out what was real and what was performance. Elaine saw me coming and her smile sharpened, like a knife that knows it's expected to be polite before it cuts. "Mr. Hale," she said, loud enough for the speaker. "We finally resolved the matter with the estate court order and everything. We're here to auction the property." The way she said it, you'd think she'd been carrying justice in her handbag all along. This is where the act breaks and the heart starts getting the upper hand. I asked for the paperwork, because paperwork is where the truth usually hides, and it was time to go digging. Sheriff Tommy Reyes, friendly enough, but with that official tiredness you get in places where every problem is somebody else's disaster, flipped through a stack of documents that looked stamped and decisive, and for a second I felt the whole thing tilt toward the kind of law that shows up on paper and pretends to be everything. Elaine read from some clause about liens and unpaid fees, and a few strangers in the crowd nodded like they were watching a nature documentary about someone else's life. But you don't inherit 100 years of dirt and memories without learning to read the footnotes. So I asked where the lien came from, who signed it, and why the notice was posted the same week as the funeral. That's when the first little cracks showed dates that didn't line up, a signature that looked too smooth, and some company name, Mountain Bridge Investments, that smelled like a shell if you ever smelled one. I mentioned the deed, the original parcel map my grandfather kept in a leather folder, the kind of thing people show their kids and then tell them not to lose, and suddenly the room got quieter. My friend Sam rolled up about then in a truck that looked like it had a story for every dent, because word travels fast, and Sam doesn't like seeing me outnumbered. He stepped out slow, hands in his pockets, grin like he's about to make a bad joke, and people relax a little because Sam fills space the way thunder fills a sky. He didn't shout. He just stood there big, steady, and that alone shifted the mood. Crowd cameras trained on the tent. Somebody recorded on a phone, but Amy, our neighbor, who'd come out carrying a casserole like some relic of decency, was standing with me, eyes wide and proud and miserable at the same time. That's the middle beats of this thing, the standoff, the paperwork, the slow reveal. I found my father's deed in my pocket, partly from muscle memory and partly because he'd told me, before he was gone, "Don't ever let them sell the place." I laid that leather folder on the hood of Sam's truck and opened it. The ink was faded, the corners were worn, and people could see it plain: the stamps, the chain of title, the old survey with Mason Hollow, and the little stream my brothers used to fish in. I called Nora Vansamy, cousin knows a lawyer, who knows a lawyer, and in 20 minutes she showed up with the kind of impatience only a person who believes in proof can get away with. Nora looked at the HOA paperwork and smiled like someone who'd found a bad haircut on a mannequin, amused and ready to fix it. Nora did what lawyers dosh, talked slow and precise, and she laid out the math of fraud in a way that didn't mean much to the auctioneer, but meant everything to the sheriff. Mountain Bridge Investments, it turned out, had a string pulling back to a shell company that traced to a P.O. box, and then to an LLC where Elaine's husband, Richard Mercer, had been a listed officer before he mysteriously disappeared from the filings. The crowd shifted. The auctioneer's voice lost its surety. Elaine started to talk faster, too fast, all pearl-clutched hands and little coughs that tried to sound firm. This is where people expect a shouting match or some heroic speech, but real life does things quieter sometimes. Elaine got mean, not loud mean like a winter wind, precise and cold. "You're buying time with memories," she said to me. And I could have laughed because what else are memories but the only clean currency we have? I said to her, "Calm because anger tastes better when it's simmered. You can't auction what you don't own." She smiled with her teeth, said something about the process being legal, and that's when she reached for her clipboard like it was a prop in a play designed to make you clap. The climax had to be honest. I thought about bullets and bravado and then decided to do something simpler and cleaner. I fired a single shot. Not at a person, not at a building, but a single round into the dirt in front of the auction tent. It was the only language the atmosphere understood quickly enough to stop the show one loud punctuation that made phones drop and people look at the ground like they'd been woken from a dream. It wasn't about violence as spectacle. It was about making a room remember it was full of human beings, breathing and startled and accountable. People scattered, more from instinct than fear. Some ran for cars. Some retreated to the edges with their clipboards clutched like talismans. Sheriff Reyes moved faster than I expected, which is to say he did what he should have done sooner, and Nora handed him copies of the deed and the survey while Sam kept a crowd behind him. Elaine, who had been practiced in performative control, unraveled a little. The smile cracked and turned into something like panic. Nora's voice, even when she was calm, had that legal kind of weight. You could feel the shift from story to consequence. They took statements, as the films like to say, and the sheriff's tamped-down authority did the work of a community trying to remember law as something other than a banner on a tent. Elaine and a couple of her people were led away to answer for forgery and conspiracy to defraud, words that sound neat, but are brutal when you say them out loud to somebody who thought rules were a place to hide ambition. We cleaned up the tent ourselves, neighbors showing up with hammers and trucks and casseroles, and resentments folded into practical labor. The auctioneer's voice was gone, replaced by the clink of stakes and the mud on our boots. There's a quiet that comes after things like theta, different quiet than grief, a quiet that smells like honest work and small victory, and a bright, raw sort of relief. I stood on the porch where my dad used to smoke in the evening, watched the sun lay itself out over the fields, and felt every small ache at once. Sam clapped me on the shoulder. Nora muttered something sarcastic about, "Don't ever do that again without a permit." And Sheriff Reyes admitted, off record, that he should have looked closer sooner. Those are the small confessions that matter. But I don't want to tie this up like a neat little bow because life doesn't often give you one. Richard Mercer's name is gone from the filings now, but who really profits and how the money moves through thin air is a longer play. There will be paper trails and subpoenas and months of courtrooms. Elaine got arrested, sure, but systems are clever and people adapt, and the HOA model, those tiny committees with outsized wills, keeps cropping up in places where folks forget to read fine print. So I left the porch light on that night more as a beacon than a celebration, because victory felt tentative and because I wanted the neighborhood to know someone was awake. This whole thing isn't just about me or a tent or a gunshot. It's about what we call community and who gets to decide. It's about a man who whistles in his sleep when he's proud of a fence, and an organization that thinks a ledger can replace a lifetime. It's about the little ways dignity shows up: your cousin who drives 3 hours, your neighbor who brings a casserole, your sheriff who finally reads a deed the way it deserves to be read. I told the story here because I wanted you to see what it looks like when a place fights back without turning into something it hates. So I'll leave you with this, and I mean it. What would you have done, sitting on that porch, smelling funeral rain and fresh-cut betrayal? Tell me below, because I want to know which kind of justice you believe in: the kind that shows up in courtrooms and the kind that shows up on porches, the kind that's patient and the kind that speaks with a single loud voice, a single clear line. Share, argue. Tell me if I was a fool or a hero or just a man who got lucky with friends. If you've ever seen something like T-San HOA overreach, a shady auction, somebody trying to sell your memories, drop it in the comments. Because these kinds of neighborhoods change when people talk, and when people don't let a tent speak for a town. If you like the story, share it. If you hate the ending, say so. Make it messy, make it honest, because that's where the good conversations start.